Next, I would like to talk about a very important example of a positive externality. An example that we call a public good. A public good is a good or service that is provided maybe by individuals, maybe by the community, but it's provided and in the end can be used and benefit many. So, to be more precise, a public good is something that is non-rival. What does it mean? A public good can be consumed, but its consumption does not reduce the amount available to consume by other people. Okay, so for example, if you build a bridge in a certain village and there are not too many people in the village, then just because some people use a bridge, it can still also be used by others. So just because you use a bridge twice a day, it doesn't reduce the amount of how many times others can use that bridge. Obviously, that assumes to some extent that there are too many people in this village, but for most public projects, that is to some extent true. On top of that, public goods are non-excludable. That means a provider can't stop other people who do not pay for it actually from using it. Okay, so if you provide we had the example before, nice flowers in your garden, which also is very beautiful for others and they like it as well. They can also consume the nice flowers in your garden because they can walk by and have a look at them. It is at least very difficult for you to stop others from consuming them as well. I mean, you would have to build probably a fence that that protects the view, and you wouldn't want to do that because that is also not very nice for you. So in a sense, a public good first provide something that can be consumed by others because you can't stop them from not consuming it. But to some extent also, it doesn't matter so much because if others consume it, it doesn't reduce the quantity or the availability of the public good for yourself and for other people. So the classic examples are armies. So if a country decides to have an army that somehow guarantees security for the inhabitants of the country, that is essentially consumed by all the inhabitants of the country. And just because I am protected by the army doesn't restrict the way others in the country are protected by this army. So it is non-rival. It's also non-excludable because everyone in the country somehow is protected by the army of this country, at least from foreign threats. So the idea is it's also non-excludable. You can't somehow prevent people living in the country from somehow benefiting from the army. And the same is true for air, for knowledge, say for lighthouses. These are all examples of public goods. The problem with public goods is its creation. In general, providing a public good creates a positive externality. So that's a good thing. It means someone creates something or provides something that is beneficial for many. And also, the usage of it by many doesn't cause a problem because it is non-rival. And also you can't prevent it anyway to be used by others because it's non-excludable. So what is now the problem with providing the public good? Let me explain by a simple model. I want to have it as simple as possible, but still want to show you at the heart what happens if a community, that means a certain amount of people, let's say a certain amount of consumers, are interested in a public good. You can think of a village who thinks about building a certain pathway or building a street in the middle of the village that can be used by everyone in the village. So let's assume there are n, and let's assume n is larger or is at least as large as 2 consumers. That could be the inhabitants of the village who have to decide on whether to build a street in the village or not, and one public good, which is a street. Okay, so each inhabitant of the village, each consumer clearly derives a certain utility from the public good. So now let's say if the public good is a street, y in this example could be the length of the street. The idea is the consumer derives a larger utility if there's more available of the public good. For example, if the street in the village is longer. And for consumer I, the utility that this consumer gets from y amounts of the public goods, so for example y meters of the street, is given by vi of y. Okay? And I make some technical assumptions, and the technical assumptions essentially state that the utility function is strictly increasing in the amount of the public good. The longer the street, the better it is for the inhabitants, because it's easier to travel all the distances necessary in this village. And I also assume that the second derivative of the utility function is negative. Or in other words, the utility is concave, which essentially means there's a decreasing return of utility if y grows, if the street becomes longer and longer. Okay? In other words, let me give you just a brief picture on how this might look like. The utility function might look like this. If this is y and this is vi, this is vi of y. So it's increasing, but it's concave. Okay? So that is essentially the assumption we have here. And that's plausible in many situations. At some point it doesn't matter anymore whether the street has 1000 kilometers or 1001 kilometer of length. The additional utility, if y is already large, the increase here becomes smaller and smaller. The consumers also care about money. Obviously, they have to finance somehow this street, so there must be a trade-off between keeping the money and spending it otherwise, or putting it into the project of building the street, for example. So the consumers also get some utility from money. Okay? And to express this, we need to have what we'll now call the total utility, or just the utility function of the consumer, which consists of the utility derived from the public good, which we call vi of y, plus the amount of money mi that a customer or a consumer has. Okay, so the total utility uy has a component that is just depending on the amount of the public good that the consumer can consume, how long the street in the village is, and the amount of money the consumer has. And it's linear. The total utility is linear in the amount of money and the utility part coming from the public good consumption. So we call this therefore also a quasi-linear utility function, which is in general a utility function here that is linear in money. There's obviously also a cost of providing the public good. If it was costless, they would obviously opt as a village to create as long streets as possible. So there must be some cost of providing the public good, and the cost of providing the public good is given by the cost function. Obviously, we assume that the more street you provide, or the village provides, or is built, the larger the cost. So the cost function is as usual increasing, that's standard, and I'm assuming here it's convex, meaning it becomes more and more expensive to extend the street, simply, for example, because there's no space left anymore to extend the street more and further and more and more. So the cost function will look like this. Okay? So it is a convex cost function, which is strictly increasing. That is a starting point for our analysis. Let us now discuss the two different ways of how the public good could be provided, and then discuss which is better. So the first situation I would like to look at is a situation where the public good is created by the community as a whole. That means the village gathers together, maybe at a meeting, at the village meeting, and makes a decision on whether together build the street or not. And they will make this decision in such that they will maximize the total utility of all the people affected. That means everyone is not only, if you want, looking at the own benefit from the street, but also cares about the benefits of all the others of the street, because in total the village wants to make a decision that is maximizing what we call aggregate welfare, which is nothing but the sum of all the individual benefits or utilities that come from the street, that come from the public good. But what is the optimal amount of the public good if the village together makes a decision such that aggregate welfare is maximized? Let's have a look. First thing to note is that aggregate welfare, which we usually depict by or denote by W of y, depends obviously on the amount of street that is provided. What we do is, to find out what the total benefit is we simply have to add up the individual benefits from the public good. Okay, so the individual benefits from the public good are just the sum from 1 to n, sum over all the people that live in the village, of all the people affected, of all the end consumers, and we add up the individual utility that comes from the consumption of the public good. Okay, so this is the total, if you want, revenue in terms of utility for all the people who benefit from the street, from the public good. And we subtract the cost. Okay, so this is now the total aggregate welfare, the total benefit minus the total cost of building the public good, of providing the public good from the viewpoint of all involved, of the whole village. So now obviously if they all together make a decision on how much of the public good should be provided, they are simply maximizing this expression here. Okay? And whichever level y is maximizing this expression is the socially optimal amount of the public good. And we denote this by YE, E for efficient, which, as you already know, is another term for socially optimal. So the efficient amount of the public good is just the Y, that's why we have argmax here, it's a Y that maximizes this expression here, which is just the total aggregate or the aggregate welfare from the public good. Okay, so to find out what the optimal level is, they have to they have to find out what the maximum of this expression is, which clearly depends on what the cost function is and what these individual benefits, these individual utilities from the consumption of the public goods are. I don't give you a specific functional form, so we can't calculate it here. We just know it should probably somehow exist, and if I gave you Vi and C, you should be able actually to find out what this number YE is. And a more interesting question for us here now is to figure out how it is paid for. How, if in the end the village decides to provide a certain amount YE of the public good, that is the optimal one for everyone together, how that is financed. Okay, I don't know for sure, I can't answer this question for sure here, but one way to finance it is to have a lump sum tax for everybody. It means everyone has to pay the same amount to finance the street or to finance the public good. And if they all have to pay exactly the same, you can say it's a lump sum tax, that means a tax that is the same for everybody, of the total costs that the village occurs if it creates a public good. So that C of YE, of the optimal level of the public good, divided by the number of consumers N. Okay, and this can be done whenever all the people in the village have enough money, or each individual in the village, in the group of consumers, has enough money to pay this tax. Or in other words, whenever the amount of money MI that the consumer I has is above what she or he needs to pay to provide the public good. I would like to show you how we can find this socially optimal level of the public good YE that I talked about on the previous slides. This here is the definition, as you remember from the previous slide, of the aggregate welfare. So that is what all the consumers together would like to maximize if, say, they wanted to have the best amount of the public good in terms of what is best for them as a group. Okay? So just to remind you, the aggregate welfare consists of two components. The first is obviously the cost, and the second, or here, actually the second is the cost, the first is the benefit to all of them. It's the aggregate benefit expressed by the sum of all the individual benefits. And just to show you again how this looks like in a diagram, where we have the amount of the public good here on this axis, and where we have the costs and the benefits on the other axis. And under the assumptions that we've made on the previous slide, which were that the costs are increasing and are convex, so the cost function looks somehow like this, so this is C of I, and remember the individual utility functions from the public good, they were also increasing, but they were concave, which implies that also the sum of these individual benefits from consuming the public good are concave. We have that the sum of all these VIs, this sum here, is concave and increasing, and therefore will look like something like that. Okay, so from this we can see two things. First, if the situation is as I have depicted it here, there must be a certain level of the public good that maximizes the difference between the two. Okay, so it is obviously somewhere here. Actually, mathematically, we know where this is. It is wherever the derivative of this expression here is equal to 0. Okay, so it is where the derivative of aggregate welfare is equal to 0, and the derivative of aggregate welfare obviously is the sum of all the marginal utilities. So these are the VI primes, the derivatives of the individual utilities from consuming the public good minus the marginal cost of the public good, where that is 0. Or in other words, in a sense, it's the usual condition that you know from many of the other situations we've looked at in this course. Whenever the marginal benefit of consuming the public good is equal to the marginal cost of providing the public good. Okay, so whenever the marginal benefit, that is the sum of all the marginal individual benefits, VI prime, is equal to the marginal cost of providing the good. Okay, so this is one possible outcome. And that is the one associated with this picture. But there could be another outcome. And I would like to draw here another situation that is consistent with the assumption we've made. Again, the cost function is convex, so it might look like this. And the benefit function is concave, so and increasing. So it might actually look like this. So it might be that the situation looks like this. Okay, so what we can see here is that the difference between these two, between the benefit minus a cost, is in a sense always negative. And that is because in this picture, the benefits from the public good are always below the costs of the public good. So it's not like here where there was a certain area where the benefits were above the cost. Here the benefits are always below the cost. And the reason for this is that C prime at 0, that means the slope of the cost function at this point is already larger, it's already steeper than the benefit curve. Okay, so if we have that the slope of the cost curve is already at point 0 larger than the derivative of the benefits, okay, then as we can see from this picture, the optimal amount of the public good is 0. Okay, because any quantity of the public good leads to larger costs than it leads to benefits. So the cost will always outweigh the benefits if that is the situation. So obviously the efficient level of the public good is 0, because if the cost is always larger than the benefit, you should never produce anything of the public good. Okay, so this is what I summarize on the next slide. To summarize, whenever the marginal cost of providing the public good at the quantity 0 is already larger than the marginal benefit, this implies, as we've seen on the diagram I depicted before, that for any level of consumption of the public good, the costs are above the benefits. That means the optimal solution to the problem of what amount of the public good maximizes aggregate welfare has to be 0. The cost is always larger than the benefit, so you wouldn't provide any of it if you want to maximize aggregate welfare. In a sense, we have a corner solution, and the socially optimal level of the public good is YE is equal to 0. If we are in the other situation where C prime of 0 is above, where this here is above the sum of the marginal benefits from consuming the public good, it is just that the sum of the marginal benefits has to be equal to the marginal cost. That's in a sense similar to our usual condition that the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. The revenue in a sense is here the benefit. The marginal benefit of all is the sum of the marginal benefits, and that in optimum must be just equal to the marginal cost. For the same argument that we've used many times before when we argued for why marginal revenue needs to be equal to marginal cost. So the social optimal level of the public good is positive in that situation, and the sum of the consumer's marginal benefits has to equal the marginal cost of providing the public good. I would like to contrast this outcome, again, the outcome of what the whole group of consumers would decide if they together wanted to aggregate their total welfare, their common benefits, for example, because a village decides together what is best for them as a whole village, how that contrasts to a situation where the public good is provided individually. So where individuals make a decision on providing a certain amount of the public good, for example, building the part of the street that is in front of their house, without taking into account how their decision impacts on others. So what would be the outcome if everyone in the village was contributing to the public good, but only to the amount that is optimal for him or herself? Okay, not taking into account that what they provide in terms of the public good also has a positive effect, a positive externality on others. To formalize this idea, we consider the case where the public good is provided privately by all the consumers. So every consumer provides a little bit to the public good. So for example, pays a little bit of the money or creates a little bit of the street or something like that. The amount that consumer I provides is denoted by yi. So the total amount in the end that is provided if this private provision takes place is given by yp, p for private provision of the public good. And it's just the sum of all the individual contributions to the public good. So it's the sum of all the individual contributions yi. So what is now the rule of the game? The rule of the game is they don't decide together what is best for them as a group. Each consumer now decides independently of each other and just takes into account the own benefit of providing the respective amount yi. What would be the outcome of this game? Let's have a look. So what is the objective function that each consumer now looks at? It's not the total and aggregate welfare anymore, because that is only at their scope when they come together and want to provide the amount of the public good that's best for all of them together. Each consumer I actually just looks at his or her own utility. And this is given by this amount here. You might remember Vi is the individual benefit from the public good, and the public good is provided in total by the amount of what consumer I provides plus what all the other consumers other than consumer I provide to the public good. So this is the total amount provided to the of the public good. The part that individual I, the one we consider here, consumer I, her or himself provides, and then what all the others provide. And what is the cost for consumer I to provide to the public good? It's the price of creating the public good, of buying the public good. For example, the price of hiring a construction company to build a part of the street, which is given by P, times the amount of the public good that consumer I provides. So in a sense, P is the market price of the public good. For example, the price a consumer has to pay on the market for construction workers to create a certain amount of street in the village. In a sense, there's an implicit assumption here that the consumers are price takers on this market for the public good. They can go to the market of construction firms who create or who build streets and hire at the market price, which is given, which they can't impact, hire a firm to create a certain amount yi of the public good. And the price per unit yi is given by P, and the individual consumers are price takers. They can't impact on this price. But what is now the optimal amount they will individually provide to the public good? Let's have a look. So the necessary and sufficient condition for the optimal amount, and I denote the optimal amount that each individual I provides by yi star, again star for the individually optimal amount, if you want for what they provide in the Nash equilibrium, that consumer I provides, and that is clearly given as usual by the derivative of the individual profit function that we had on the previous slide, which was, as you might remember, it was the benefit of providing a certain amount yi of the public good minus the cost of it. The cost was a price and the benefit is given by Vi of the total amount provided of the public goods. So the necessary and sufficient condition is obviously that the marginal individual benefit is equal to the marginal price of providing a certain amount yi star of the public good. So what is a marginal individual benefit? It's given by the derivative vi prime of the individual benefit from the public good. So it's vi prime at the total quantity of the public good provided in equilibrium, which is the own quantity that consumer I provides, plus the quantities yk that all the others provide in equilibrium. So the condition for the optimal amount yi prime that consumer I provides to the public good is given by this expression with equality here. So why do we have inequality here? We have small or equal here rather than equality. The reason is that just as we had it in the case of the aggregate welfare, it could be that an individual optimally doesn't provide anything to the public good. And that is if the price of the public good is always above the marginal individual benefit, given the amounts that the others provide. So that is if vi prime of 0 plus this amount is smaller than p. Then the optimal amount for consumer I to provide is 0. If consumer I provides a positive amount, we necessarily need to have equality here, because then we need to have that the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost, which is a price p. What you can see from this equation or inequality is that the consumers do not consider the externality of their decision on the others, because they only look at their own marginal benefit. That means the marginal benefit of others that is also increased if they provide to the public good is not part of this equation at all. You can see that actually consumer I's well-being, or consumer I's, if you want, optimality condition, consumer I's marginal individual benefit, does not only depend on his or her own contribution to the public good, but also on the amount that the others provide. So here we can see that all the consumers other than consumer I, that means all the k's unequal I, have an impact, a positive impact on the benefit of consumer I. So they all exert a positive externality on consumer I. Next, I would like to show you that this positive externality, and in particular the fact that this positive externality is not considered when individuals make individual decisions about how much to provide to the public good, that then in this situation there is too little provision of the public good. Or in other words, if each individual makes his or her own decision on how much street he or she is going to build for the community, there will be too little streets, or too few streets, or too small streets in total. There will be too little of the public good as compared to the situation where all the consumers together care about maximizing aggregate welfare, care about the sum of all the individual benefits, and not only about each own's benefit. So it's going to be a little bit more technical now. I just want to show you in a formal way that this is indeed what's going to happen. Or in other words, that if the public good is provided privately, that then there's too little of the public good in the end, and actually it would have been better if the consumers, if the community as a whole had decided on creating the aggregate welfare maximizing amount of the public good. So in a sense, this is a story in favor of not individual decision making, but in favor of a community deciding together about what is best for them as a group. Let's have a look at the mathematics. So we've already said the total amount of the public good that is provided if all the individuals consider individually for themselves on how much to provide is given by y star p. It's the sum of all the individual equilibrium contributions yi prime, which are given by the condition from the previous slide. And just to make this whole thing more interesting, I'm assuming that also there's a positive amount of the public good being provided if the individuals decide themselves. I mean, if that was 0, there's nothing to discuss here because there wouldn't be anything of the public good being provided. So I'm assuming also individual provision of the public good does result in some streets being built, in some provision of the public good. Okay, we already know what we have is that that the marginal benefit, the individual marginal benefit, Vi prime, at the equilibrium level of the public good, if it's provided privately, that this is smaller than the price. Actually, it is exactly equal to the price for those consumers I who provide a positive amount of the public good. That is just the condition from the previous slide. You provide as much of the public good as equates your marginal benefit from doing it with your marginal cost of doing it, which is the price. Okay? So we have equality here whenever consumer I provides a positive amount. So this inequality here comes from summing up all these inequalities. We know for one of them there must be equality here. We also know that because in total there's a positive amount of the public good, that the marginal benefit for every individual must be positive, because everyone can consume at least a little bit of the public good, because there is something to consume, because all these expressions are positive. And one of them is equal to P. The sum of all these expressions need to be larger than P. Okay, one is equal to P, all the others are positive as well, so the sum must be larger than P, than the price. Okay, what else do we know? So we know actually that this condition must hold for the private provision of the public good. We also know that because the public good is provided in a competitive market, so all the consumers who provide to the public good buy their contribution on a competitive market. That means on a market where the price is given by the marginal cost of creating the public good. That is, if you remember, what we discussed in the section on competitive markets. In competitive markets, the market price is given or is equal to the marginal cost. So that is a condition we use here, because that implies, together with this formula here, that the sum of the marginal benefits of the individuals of consuming the public good at the level that is provided of the public good by all the individuals privately is larger than the marginal cost. Okay, and as you compare this to the social optimum that we derived a few slides ago, we had that actually in the social optimum, the sum of the marginal benefits at the social optimum is not larger than the marginal cost. It is actually typically equal to the marginal cost, and just in the situation where you don't provide anything optimally to the public good, actually it is smaller than the marginal cost. So let me summarize. We know from previous calculations that in the social optimum, if all the consumers together decide what is best for them as a group, if they maximize aggregate welfare, the marginal benefits of the amount of the public goods are not larger than the marginal costs. They are usually equal, but could also be smaller. But if the public good is provided privately, because every individual makes its own contribution and only considers the own benefit it gets from its own contribution, we see that in total the marginal benefit, the sum of the marginal benefits of consumption of the public good is above the marginal cost. So what does it mean? It means that if the public good is provided privately, that too little of it is provided. Why is that? That is because, and now remember what we had, we've assumed that C prime is an increasing function in its argument. That is because C is a convex cost function. We've also assumed that Vi prime, the derivative of the benefit, of the individual benefit of consuming the public good, is concave, meaning actually that its derivative is a decreasing function in Y. In particular, also the sum of all them are also decreasing. We have that on the right hand side, this is an increasing function. On the left hand side, we have a decreasing function. is an increasing function and the other is a decreasing function. So what we have is, just to draw a small picture, we have that, for example, C prime looks like this. It's an increasing function. We have that the sum of the marginal benefits is a decreasing function. Okay, so this would be, this should be Vi prime, is a decreasing function. We have that at the amount Ye, at the efficient level, we have that this here is smaller or equal to C prime. So we have that we are somewhere in this region. That is where Ye is going to be. Okay, it's in the range where the sum of the marginal benefits is below the marginal cost. So it's somewhere here. And at the same time, we know that for the total amount provided, if the consumers make private contribution decisions, that then actually that must be at a region where the sum of the marginal benefits exceeds the marginal cost. So it must be in this region. So Yp prime must be here. So in particular, we must have that Yp prime is below the efficient level. Or in other words, there's too little contribution of the public good. And this is exactly the intuition I explained earlier. Because everyone just cares about its own benefit of the public good and doesn't see that providing the public good also does something good for others and ignores this, it gives too little. Only if they all come together and see that their contribution to the public good has a positive impact on all others and they maximize aggregate welfare, they will get the socially optimal level of the public good, which is larger than what happens if they all contribute individually. So this is, in a sense, the problem of the public good. If we rely on individuals to provide common services, this theory would suggest there will be too little of the common services, and they might be, as a solution to this problem, be provided by the state, because the state collects taxes, but then, hopefully, that's the theory, makes decisions that are optimal for everyone. And in that sense, doesn't have the problem of neglecting the positive externality of decisions on others. On this slide, you can see the summary of what I just said. First, if the public good is privately provided, the supply of the public good is lower than the social optimum. And second, how this follows from the calculations we've done on the previous slide, which I've shown you on the graph.